might have heard a lot of scary statistics about autism and employment. According to a 2024 review, just 3 in 10 autistic people are in employment compared to 5 in 10 when you look at disability as a whole. Only 36% of autistic graduates find work 15 months after studying, and autistic adults face the largest pay gap of all disability groups. It's depressing, and this is despite 70% of autistic people wanting to work. So to try and help a tiny little bit in my own tiny little way, I've put together a list of over 70 jobs that might be a good fit for autistic people. I've searched the internet, I've read what a lot of other autistic people have had to say about what jobs have worked for them, and I've put together a few different categories of jobs, and I'm just gonna read a whole lot to you, and you can listen and see if any of them resonate with you. Obviously, every single autistic person is so different. Not every single job is going to be a great fit for you. And at the end, I'll talk about a few things not related specifically to job title that might affect how much you enjoy a job and how well suited a particular job is for you. I don't know, making this list made me personally feel a lot better and a lot more positive about, like, you know, what if this whole thing that I'm doing here falls apart? Because I've historically really struggled with employment. I've spent, I think, about 4 months in employment. The rest of my life, I've had to scrape together an income, being self-employed. It's been a weird, chaotic path. Luckily, I'm quite good with budgeting, so I've made it work despite being on a very low income. But I don't know, some of these options make me feel like, maybe there are other things that I can do and other things that would sound fun and interesting to me. But I'm gonna go through 70-ish jobs that might be worth exploring as an autistic person. So the first category, I suppose, is kind of working for a cause that means a lot to you sort of jobs. This might include working for an autism charity. I know over here in the UK, the National Autistic Society and the PDA Society, for the Pathological Demand Avoidance Profile of Autism, both of those charities put an emphasis on hiring autistic people. And maybe in your area, you can find similar charities and organizations who, you know, you kind of morally agree with and align with, who encourage autistic people and disabled people to apply for these positions. I know the National Autistic Society has a lot of support work positions and things like that, and they really do say that they value having autistic people. It's nice to think that your diagnosis might actually help you get the job, rather than like, oh, do I disclose, or is that gonna maybe make me less likely to get the position? Do I have to wait to get the job before I disclose, which is a thing that a lot of people do. It's nice to think that it might be a selling point, you know? And maybe not just autism charities, but charities linked to another disability or another marginalized group. That might be a good fit for you. A lot of autistic people, obviously, we can have a strong sense of justice, and it might be easier for us to get up and, you know, get out there and do difficult things if we feel like there's a greater purpose. I think that's true for all people, not just for autistic people. But we can be quite a passionate bunch, you know, and maybe just working for a charity in general about a cause that you care about. In the UK, you can search a website called Charity Jobs. There may be similar websites in your country where you can, you know, specifically look at working for a charity. And maybe working with autistic people might be a good option for you in general, even if it's not for a charity. You might want to do some sort of support work. A lot of autistic people do report, you know, getting on better with other autistic people, being able to relate to them. So maybe, again, support work might be a good option, or maybe some sort of teaching or classroom assistant in a school for autistic children. The second category was a kind of type of job that I saw coming up quite a lot, and that was quieter and maybe more scripted sort of customer service roles. Bank teller was one that came up. Someone on Reddit said that they worked as a cashier at a furniture store and that their boss allowed them to read or play games when it was quiet. This was quite a common theme, people working in kind of quiet customer service roles, being allowed to, you know, maybe read or play games or put their headphones on when things were a bit more chill. I know my mother-in-law worked a job where she sold kitchens, and I think there were elements of the job that were a bit stressful, but a lot of the time the shop was actually very quiet. Working somewhere at night, like a supermarket at night maybe, that might be a bit creepy, that would probably creep me out. Or maybe a hotel at night might be another option. Someone who worked at a supermarket at night said they were, again, allowed to wear their headphones. Maybe you're just allowed to be a bit weirder at night, you know? Olivia Hops has actually spoken about how she found a little part-time job that she really loved. She has a video about it, but she worked for a greetings card company stocking the shelves of a supermarket and making it look the way they wanted it to look. The role was called merchandising. I think sometimes that can mean a slightly different, like, more involved role, but she seemed to really like that. It seemed like it was really, you know, chill, and she kind of made her own hours and she didn't really have to talk to anyone, and it sounded like it was a pretty good fit for her. Some people spoke about stocking stores before they open. Warehouse work was another one that came up. I guess it's repetitive and there's not a lot of socializing. Some people enjoy working as a secretary or doing admin somewhere that's pretty quiet, or also doing admin from home, maybe being a virtual assistant, something like that. Category number 3 is museum. It gets its own category. I felt quite excited about this one personally. I was like, ooh, I can see myself being in a museum. So yeah, it can be quiet. I suppose you might have, school visits and stuff. It might be busier, but generally it can be quite a quiet, calm, peaceful place. I suppose there's lots of different types of museum. If it's connected to your special interest, it may literally be part of your job to info dump at people, and people actually are there for it. That's what the people want. So that could be kind of cool. I just thought then, I was like, what about walking tours and stuff like that? I bet autistic people would be excellent guides for things like that. That's another one. There's a bonus one. But yeah, in a museum, you could be more public facing if that's what you'd prefer, or maybe jobs in archives or curation. I imagine, some of them will require some degree of studying, but yeah, could be an option. And then I've also put librarian. I suppose like museums and libraries can go together as kind of more chill public spaces. Librarian was another one that made me kind of excited. It does require studying, but it sounds pretty lovely. And there's lots of different types of library that you could librarian in. There's healthcare, prison, school, academic and research, many, many different types. The next category, number 4, is like jobs that involve some element of performing. This stereotypically to a lot of people wouldn't sound like something that was very autism friendly. I think to people outside of the community, it would be a bit confusing. I think people can sometimes underestimate how good a lot of autistic people can be at performing and public speaking and communicating in sort of non-social ways. I think some autistic people do seem to have this sort of performance gene. I don't particularly love socializing, but I never minded doing presentations at school which involved public speaking, and this always really confused teachers and sometimes led to me being underestimated a bit. But it's a very different form of communication. There's none of that back and forth. You know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. We're often good at info dumping, so we just get to present information. I don't know, for a lot of us, not all autistic people, but for some of us at least, I think it can feel quite natural. We know what's expected of us. We know what we gotta say. There are kind of more clear rules to the interaction than there is in a more chaotic sort of social situation. Obviously, there are a lot of autistic actors like Anthony Hopkins and also Chloe Hayden. And then Melanie Sykes is a TV presenter who's been diagnosed autistic later on in life. And then also Susan Boyle, the Scottish singer, was diagnosed autistic. I think there's probably a lot of people in performing arts who are autistic. There's also probably a lot of autistic people who are into dance because you get to move your body. I know Paige Leal does some work as a dance teacher. And I just think in general, this might seem like a bit of a weird one to have in here, but I think being a teacher in general is kind of like a sort of performance. I have a lot of teachers in my family. I always considered that as a potential thing that I might want to do. I think there's a lot of reasons why it's a difficult job, but I mean, every job obviously has its ups and downs. But as a teacher or a lecturer, you can kind of just ramble on. You can have a one-sided conversation. It's like perfect for autistic, monotropic brains. You can kind of talk at people and get excited about information and things that you're passionate about. And again, it is almost like a scripted form of communication. You know exactly what your role is in that moment. I have to teach this particular material to these people. In section number 6, I put kind of other artistic jobs, artistic, not autistic. I think there are a lot of neurodivergent people and LGBTQ plus people who are drawn towards the arts. A tattoo artist was one that came up, and people said, you're kind of allowed to be a bit more aloof. It's more of the stereotype of a tattoo artist. And I guess that's true if you imagine the stereotype of a tattoo artist versus a hairdresser, it's quite different. And if one of your interests is drawing, you get to spend a long time drawing on people. Wish I could draw, but I'm sure there are many autistic people watching like me who have a dyspraxia diagnosis and can't draw. But there's also a lot of people who say they do have a dyspraxia diagnosis, but they can draw, which I think is super interesting, and I guess just shows how we're all so different. Animation was another one that a lot of autistic people really love. Obviously, Dani from Love on the Spectrum runs her own animation company. Video editing and graphic design are another two. If you think you might be interested in video editing, you might want to stay to to the end of the video, but definitely a special interest of mine. You can get super zoned in to video editing. Oh, it's so monotropic friendly. I remember the first time I edited a video, I was like, this is heavenly. I loved it so much. It's so great to hyperfocus on. Being a camera operator is another one, or a photographer. Again, I think it's quite monotropic friendly to be focusing on the world through a lens. I just feel like it makes sense. If you don't know what I'm talking about with monotropism, I'll leave the link to my video about monotropism. It's a theory of how autistic minds work that makes me really excited. I really love it. Working in publishing is another one. I imagine a lot of autistic people would make really great book editors, just with the attention to detail. And also book cover designer. There's a load of different roles that you could do within publishing, but in the UK, most of the time, if you do want to work in publishing, you're probably gonna have to be based in London, which is super expensive. I put being a baker in the arts category too. I quite like baking. I'm not very good at it, but it's quite soothing and relaxing, and again can be quite creative. Olivia Hobbs has done loads. This was another thing that Olivia Hobbs did. She had a business, I think it was called Unbaked, selling cookie dough. But baker again is another thing that you could do self-employed. There's a lot of businesses that run through social media, or you could have your own shop if you did want to be self-employed, which does work well for a lot of autistic people. I'll speak about that a little bit later on in the video as well. When I was speaking to one of the diagnosticians who diagnosed me, they were talking about how they find a lot of autistic people are very entrepreneurial. Obviously not all autistic people will be, and shouldn't have to be. It would be great to have a world where traditional employment was more accessible and we didn't always have to revert to self-employment, because not everybody is business minded and not everybody wants to do that, and sometimes it can be very isolating working for yourself. Some autistic people do find success making things and selling them. Abby from Love on the Spectrum has Hats by Abby, and also Claire from Woodshed Theory is really great at crocheting, and she has an Etsy store where she sells hats and stimming scarves as well. I'll leave a link to that below. I followed this amazing account on TikTok called Sound of the Forest. Just as an aside, she has this beautiful leaf blanket that she's made, and she's made a load of moss themed things as well. I love it. But she paints. Her special interest is insects, and yeah, she paints insects, and her paintings are just incredible. Obviously, it can be difficult to make a living off a lot of these things. I know, because my mom is an artist, is a sculptor. It's a struggle, and a lot of people can't really do it without having a partner to support them. But say you're in a burnout and you just want to make a little bit of extra money on the side, it could be something to consider. And you never know, you could hit something that's really trending and doing really well, and it could take off for you. Some people do manage to make it a full-time job if that's what you want. Not everything that you do has to obviously be monetized, which I'll talk about again in a minute. So the next subcategory of jobs is one that I probably would never have thought to associate with autism before I started reading about it, but now I feel like it makes so much sense, not for me, but for a different type of autistic person. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see how that works. But before I get onto that, I want to share with you a really easy way that you can organize your life for free, which might be helpful on your job search or whatever it is that you've got going on at the moment, because this video is sponsored by X-Tiles. So when I went to Edinburgh recently for the Eras tour, I picked up this absolutely beautiful notebook, and this was of course supposed to be the notebook that was finally gonna change my life. I was gonna get everything together. Nothing was ever gonna be wrong again. You know that sort of notebook. But has it happened? No, it's still blank. I've just come to accept that digital makes so much more sense for me. However, online productivity tools confuse me a bit sometimes, because I'm like, surely once you've gone through setting up all of that in order to get your life together, you've actually got no time to do the stuff on your list. So is that really productive? And that's what I really like about X-Tile. It's been described as Notion for people who don't have time to figure out how Notion works, which sounds good to me. And I think it's ideal for autistic people and for ADHDers because of the visual aspect, and also because it's so flexible. You add tiles to your various pages, hence the name X-Tiles, and these tiles can contain text, but also images, video, audio files, code, even more. One of the most important functions is adding tasks to your tiles. You click the new task button and then you type in your task. You can also add a deadline or set reminders, and then all of your different tasks appear conveniently in this little menu, and they also sync with the mobile app. You can drag your tiles around and you can color code them. It just feels very satisfying and intuitive. If you do need inspiration, you can find something in their template gallery too. In my X-Tiles project, which has been named Meg's Magical Notebook, I currently have my daily planner, my goals for the remainder of 2024. I have a space where I can journal, and I also have a vision board because my landlord wanted my home of 6.5 years back, back. And I'm trying to make myself feel excited about moving somewhere that I probably wouldn't have chosen otherwise, and I'm actually not excited about it at all. If you want to try Xtels, you can use my link in the description or scan the QR code. As I say, they have an amazing free version with so many features, so why not just give it a try? You may as well. But you can also go premium, which would give you extra features like extra templates, and you can also integrate your Google Calendar. Hopefully it can help you stay organized on your job hunt. Let's get back to the jobs list. So category number 6, that might work well for some autistic people, is learning a trade. So you could be a plumber, an electrician, a roof thatcher. I don't know, there's loads of choice, a joiner. It's obviously a skill that's always in demand. You can make a lot of money, you can make your own hours, you can be self-employed. Half the time when you hire a trade person, they don't even turn up. You don't even have to turn up. I'm joking. I'm sure there are a lot of dedicated plumbers out there. It's probably just the people that my landlord hires. My landlord, when is he going to stop being slandered in my videos? Never. Never. I'll be slandering my new landlord next. I'll have to give them code names. I don't know him. I've never met him. He might be the nicest guy on earth, but I don't think he is. Anyway. But yeah, if you're like one of those autistic people who likes to build stuff and figure out systems and be doing stuff with your hands, and you'd find it boring to kind of be sat down all day, and also, you know, I guess sometimes you'll get people chatting to you a bit, making you a cup of tea if you're in England. But you know, I guess a lot of the time you'd probably be kind of just left on your own to get on with things. For me, it would be terrible because, again, I have a dyspraxia diagnosis. I'm so bad at doing things with my hands. That kind of stuff just isn't really for me. But for some autistic people, I think it could work really well and give you a lot of independence and autonomy. Gardening and landscaping, that was another one as well. Number 7, this is a stereotypical one. IT jobs might work quite well for autistic people, and there were quite a few people online saying showing autistic traits is almost a stereotype of, you know, these job roles. But I remember at school when things would go wrong and the IT people would come out, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them had maybe been autistic. But you know, obviously you can be an IT nerd and not be autistic too. But yeah, people said that they felt more free to be nerdy and to be blunt in those roles, and like they wouldn't be judged as much. And also some people can work from home doing IT roles as well. Closely related, category number 8 is STEM jobs. Engineering is one. Paul Mikolev from Autism from the Inside used to be an engineer. I think he got burnt out doing that role. I'm sure basically any of these roles could burn you out in the wrong condition, and that's one of the struggles with being autistic and employment. But there were quite a lot of people saying, you know, they're an engineer and basically all the engineers they know are autistic and they're surrounded by autistic people. I definitely know a few people who are not autistic, who are engineers or who studied engineering, who are not autistic. But apparently there is a bit of an overrepresentation of neurodivergent individuals. There probably are in a lot of these roles, to be honest. We're just kind of everywhere. We just kind of exist. That's the thing. Who would have thought it? Software engineering, again, with these roles, you can have a lot of job security, you can make a decent income. Wish it was something that I was good at, but it is not, so that would not be good for me. Working in labs is another one. There were quite a lot of people, again, who said a lot of their co-workers were neurodivergent in some way. Someone said they worked in a small microbiology lab and they really loved it. Medical or healthcare labs was another suggestion as well. I put working as a clinical psychologist on here as well. This is what I was considering potentially doing before I found out that I was autistic and started making this channel, so that kind of like led me on the path to figuring out that I was autistic myself. I know that they are looking for more lived experience and they are valuing lived experience more within this role. In the UK, it's a very grueling process to qualify as a clinical psychologist. I'm not sure there is any universe where I would get through that without a lot of accommodations, without burnout. So I'm not sure this is ever really on the cards for me personally, but obviously all of us are different. I struggle with getting very obsessive about education. Some autistic people it might be better suited for than it is for me. There was an article semi-recently published in the British Psychological Society called Neurodiversity is Not Just for Those We Work With. And it was written by quite a large group of autistic psychologists in the UK, but it was not entirely positive. One person was told, people with your history do not do well on the course, the clinical psychology doctorate course, and I am strongly advising you not to do this course. I have heard that the course is very intense and very demanding, and yeah, it scares me. It scared me away for the moment. That article is not the most positive read, but it shows that we really do need people with lived experience in these roles. There are also other roles within psychology that you could do that might be easier to get into. In the UK, we have psychological well-being practitioners. They do like low intensity cognitive behavioral therapy with patients. You can also be an assistant psychologist, but that's pretty hard to get onto as well. Technical writer was something that came up quite a lot that a lot of autistic people seemed quite excited about. You can use your writing skills to help people understand stuff, basically. You can explain in detail how something works from start to finish. Going back to healthcare, an x-ray technician was one that came up. I also thought maybe sonographer, doing ultrasounds might be a good option. People said the interactions felt very scripted, and you can probably mostly just be talking about what you're doing. So if you do have a special interest in anatomy and things like that, people would probably be quite interested in your info dumping in that context, because they want to know about their own health. Everyone's invested in their own health, so that could work quite well. Quite a lot of people in healthcare did say the co-workers and the kind of culture is a major drawback of working in that environment. A few people said do not be a nurse, but I'm sure lots of autistic people would make great nurses. I think the conditions and the pay for working under those conditions is often not great though. But I mean, the TikToker Cheryl, who I absolutely love reacting to, and her content is just amazing. She has recently qualified as a mental health nurse, and that makes me really excited because, again, great to have more people with lived experience. I think we really need that. So it makes me excited that someone so lovely is in that role. And hopefully we can improve the conditions so we don't scare away all the good nurses. Being a doctor is another one. Apparently about 1% of doctors are autistic. It's probably higher than that, as we know a lot of autistic people are not diagnosed. And that might influence some of the stats, the scary stats that I read at the start of this video. Like if you are an autistic person who's managed to find a job where, you really slot in, you really fit in, you might just never discover that you're autistic because you kind of found your place and it's worked out and you don't really suspect that there's anything different, or you don't feel any need to go and get a diagnosis even if you do suspect that you're autistic because you don't really need the accommodations. So I think autistic people who are struggling are probably more likely to be diagnosed. There was kind of a similar article from autistic doctors speaking up about some of the discrimination they've experienced, but also how a lot of autistic doctors are being more open about having an autism diagnosis. Again, I think anatomy is quite a common autistic special interest. Tax accountant was one that came up. People said it was predictable, and also you're allowed to be socially awkward. Academic research is probably another one where you're allowed to be socially awkward and nerdy, but I think that can also be pretty stressful sometimes. There can be this kind of publish or perish sort of mentality, which might explain why people publish ridiculous things like that case study that I reacted to recently. But I think that was more to do with the author's interest in alternative medicine than anything else. Data entry was one that came up a lot. There are a lot of autistic people who seem to love data entry. I'm not sure if I would enjoy it. I don't know if I'd find it stimulating enough, but a lot of people seem to love it. But apparently there are a lot of fraudulent data entry job listings out there. So I will leave a link down below to some more information about that, just to make you aware. Be careful on your job search journey. The 9th category is jobs that involve driving. A lot of autistic people find being on the move quite soothing from a sensory perspective, and also driving quite stimulating and engaging. And obviously there's the stereotypical interest, which is true for some autistic people, of enjoying public transport. So you could be a driver of some sort of public transport vehicle. You could be a bus driver, a train driver. You could be a pilot. You could be a truck driver, a delivery driver, a taxi/Uber driver. Someone online said basically everyone at their work who delivers pizzas is autistic. I guess doing deliveries, working for a courier might work as well. You can probably just play your podcasts in the car and things like that. A lot of people also mentioned sorting mail could be an option. Number 10 might not seem that attractive to a lot of people because it's a very difficult job and it's also unpaid. Being a stay-at-home parent. Again, I'm not sure it's that easy, and I'm not sure it's the best method against preventing burnout. A lot of people speak about it like it's just staying at home with children, but it's intense and it doesn't end. You don't get off shift. When I had a child, I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Have people really been doing this for as long as humans have existed? Because this is a lot of work. It does get easier as your child gets older though. But I do wonder if being a stay-at-home parent is how a lot of particularly autistic women, who will often be the ones staying at home, have avoided having to deal with the social aspects of working and having to mask on a daily basis. Again, not that staying at home is easy. I think in some ways going out and masking at a job would probably be easier or similar. But a lot of autistic people love being around children and find children, particularly if it's your own child, a lot easier to interact with than other adults. But obviously it's hard to do that these days. It's hard to be a stay-at-home parent you'd have to probably have a partner with quite a high income to be able to do that. It's not an option for a lot of people. Number 11, closely related, working with kids. Again, being a teacher, it just is a thing for some autistic people that they get on with people who are either a lot younger or a lot older than they are, or maybe just don't, see the hierarchy involved in age so much and find it easier to get on with people no matter how old they are. Working at an after school club or a holiday club might be an option, or working at a nursery or a childcare centre. Number 12, working with older people is another option. Again, support work is an option. It's pretty intense. Often when you look at support work jobs, they will be like 12-hour shifts, but you can do a thing in the UK where you work bank, they call it. So you kind of just can pick whatever shifts you want to do. You don't have a set schedule, you just pick shifts here and there. There's always quite a lot of demand for support workers, and a lot of the time you don't need qualifications, they will give you training. Number 13, working with animals might be a good option if you find that you get on with animals better than with people, or if you just really love animals. Pet sitting is one that you can do, kind of self-employed and pick your own hours. Being a groomer came up quite a lot, but apparently there are a lot of wet dog smells. And also if you struggle with your motor skills, this might be one that's a bit more difficult as well. Depending on how much you want to study, you might want to be a vet or a veterinary nurse or a veterinary nurse assistant, or you might be able to get a job at an animal sanctuary. Number 14, I just have a bunch of random jobs that I couldn't really categorize. Massage therapist was an interesting one that came up because, you're often in a quiet, dark room with soothing music playing. There's not an expectation to talk. There's an expectation to not talk. It's like the opposite, again, of being a hairdresser in a way. But I guess it depends on how much you like touching people. Some autistic people really enjoy being in the military and really like the structure and reliability and find it kind of soothing. I would hate it. It would be my worst nightmare, but it's a spectrum, so who knows, you might enjoy it. Cleaning is another one that you could do self-employed. You could run your own business. I know a few people who I went to school with and who I knew growing up who have managed to start themselves a cleaning business. A lot of people pointed out though that it is, quite difficult physical labor to clean, but some people find it relaxing, and you could always stick on an audiobook while you cleaned. Janitorial work is a similar one. This is an interesting one. You could work as a mortician, you could do embalming, you could work at a pet or a human crematorium. I read a really interesting article from someone who worked at a crematorium. It's just something I'd never really thought about before, but I guess, if you don't want to interact with too many people who are gonna, talk back to you, could be an option. Lawyer is another one that came up, as there are a lot of neurodivergent people in this field. I did consider being a lawyer. I had this teacher in primary school who kind of encouraged me with my debate skills, and she noticed that I quite enjoyed a debate and was quite good at the whole public speaking thing. And she was like, you should be a lawyer. So then I got in my head I should be a lawyer, and then I realized that would probably bore me to sleep, so I did not become a lawyer. But I imagine there are, as I say, the strong sense of justice and attention to detail as well. There are probably a lot of skills that a lot of neurodivergent people have that are very well suited to being a lawyer, but I can imagine it can be super exhausting and super easy to burn out as well, unfortunately. And finally, category number 15, you might want to do something around your special interest. Now, hopefully, at least some of the jobs I've mentioned kind of maybe have already encompassed some of your special interests, but if it wasn't on there, you might want to try and monetize a special interest in some way, whether this is self-employed or employed in some way. There are some arguments for and against doing this. Not everyone is super for this. Personally, I kind of have to be, I think, or would very much prefer at least for a job to be connected to my special interests in order for me to feel motivated to do it, for me to stick with it. I want to be doing my interests all the time, and you have to work for most of your time. So to me, it just makes sense for my job and special interest to be somewhat aligned. I started a business that involved video editing. It wasn't, making short films, which was what my interest really was at the time, but it was kind of close enough and it involved editing. So there might be bits of compromise to make it into something that can be monetized. I was still very glad to be doing something that, was pretty close to what I wanted to be doing anyway. And I think I would struggle to stick with anything for any decent length of time if it wasn't connected to an interest. However, there are people who argue that if you monetize a special interest, you will suck all of the joy out of it. And it probably is good to try and keep things that are just for you, and not every special interest, of course, needs to be monetized. There's a lot of discussion about this in general online, just in regards to hobbies, but I think a lot of it applies to autistic special interests as well, maybe even more so. I had other interests like playing The Sims, which was, never going to be monetizable, although there are Sims related YouTube channels. It's probably a bit saturated now. I think the time has passed for me to become a Sims YouTuber. Maybe I'll do some Sims over on Patreon. I actually haven't played The Sims in so long, and actually kind of love to do that. Anyway, this is not about me trying to monetize playing The Sims. I guess you just have to think about, the intersection between what people actually want and how you can provide people with value with the skills that you have and the special interests that you like to spend your time doing. If you do want to maybe start your own business and perhaps be self-employed, a service-based business can be a really great place to start. It can be easier to get started with than other types of business. So, like doing some freelance video editing for people or something like that, or like filming events like I did, like trying to monetize my short films would have been really, really difficult. It can be very difficult to make money as an artist in that way, but monetizing, offering my skills to help other businesses was a lot easier to do. Even if it wasn't what I would be doing in an ideal world, it was an easier way for me to get the money that I needed to be able to support myself when I was 19. I think it's important to remember that there'll always be trade-offs with any job. No job is going to be 100% perfect. I can be very perfectionist and want everything to be just right all of the time. And it isn't necessarily going to be like that. I guess it's just kind of thinking about what are your non-negotiables. I think it can be great to get out there and try things as well, to not spend too much time thinking about what might be a good fit for you, because when you try things, sometimes you realize it's completely different to what you imagined in your head. And I think sometimes we can really glamorize job roles in our head, particularly when it's something like a lawyer that's, really glamorized by society or has a lot of prestige. But sometimes I think it can be helpful to think about, like, what would that job actually involve on a day-to-day basis, and is that actually how I want to be spending my days on a day-to-day basis? When I thought about being a clinical psychologist, seeing patient after patient after patient, I thought, that sounds pretty overwhelming. You know what? I don't know whether that would actually be a very good fit for my personality, even though the idea of thinking I'm a psychologist because I'm interested in psychology sounds quite good to me. I don't know if the practicality and the actual everyday of that job would be what I want. But, maybe if I gave it a go, I would actually find that I enjoyed it. So I think finding ways to do work experience, shadowing people, even just like try doing some of the activities you'd be doing on a smaller scale to see if it's something that you want to pursue further can be a good idea. I think it's probably also important to remember, like, some of how much you enjoy a job will depend on the management and the culture, how accommodating your employer is as well, what your schedule is like, how long your commute is, how much trust and freedom you're given in the role, how much you feel like the work you're doing is meaningful, all of that kind of thing. So the job conditions are probably worth considering as much as the job title. Working from home is such a great option for autistic people. I hope that more working from home jobs continue to pop up. Now COVID is over, I think there has been a bit of a push for some businesses to get back to the office, but there are some autistic people who say working from home is actually super isolating, and so they prefer kind of hybrid roles because you still get out and speak to people, but then you also get that much needed recovery time. Some people also feel like when they work full-time from home, their home becomes like not a sacred place anymore. I struggle with that as a self-employed person. I don't know when to cut off from work, and I suppose also being an autistic person, I've basically got no chance. As I say, I've never really been able to imagine myself slotting into employment, but I wonder if work from home had been more of a thing when I was younger, if that would have been different for me, and if that would solve a lot of the problems I actually do have with the workplace. You can obviously wear old comfy clothes, you can eat in peace, you'd have no commute. You can use your fidgets as well while you're in meetings. So working from home probably is quite protective against burnout for a lot of autistic people, but again, it will depend on the culture and the job role. Remember, a lot of autistic traits are super useful for employers. Here's a list of some autistic traits from some 2021 research: creative and innovative thinking, attention to detail, logical and systematic thought processes, enhanced pattern recognition, having a great memory, sustained and intense focus, ability to work independently and being kind of self-motivated, enhanced productivity and dedication, ability to find practical and effective solutions, honesty and trustworthiness, reduced concern with social pressure, a strong sense of social justice and effective empathy, intense interest in specific things, enjoyment of tasks non-autistic people might find challenging. Also remember that if you are in a burnout, or if you are not able to enter traditional employment due to being autistic, due to another disability, remember that you are not less valuable because of that. I know society can make you feel that way. It is really sad that so many of us derive most of our sense of worth from our output. That is something that's dysfunctional about society and not you. In this country, remember that you can apply for a personal independence payment, which is not means tested if you are autistic. Make sure you look at the benefits calculators, you see what you're entitled to, make sure you're looking after yourself. Look into what's available for you in your country, and I hope that you can, get the support that you need. I know it can be tricky if you don't have a diagnosis, but if you are in a burnout, even if you've not got an autism diagnosis, maybe you could get help if your doctor has you down as, being depressed or anxious. And I hope you get into a better place soon. Finding a way that you fit into the working world can be so difficult for autistic people. I used to not be able to fall asleep. I'd go down to the kitchen and I'd hunch on the floor and I'd cry, and I'd look around the room and all the furniture seemed really hostile, and I would think to myself, like, why do I not fit? Why can I not think of anything that I would want to do as a career that doesn't make me feel incredibly anxious? I'm lucky that for the moment I've fallen into something that works for me. I don't know how long this is gonna last. I am actually currently hiring a video editor, ideally someone in the UK, but I am taking applications from elsewhere as well. I will leave a link to that down below if you would be interested in applying. The link is on my Patreon, but you don't have to be actually a member of the Patreon to access it. It's just where I've posted it. So feel free to have a read of that and apply to that if you're interested. I need some help with completing all of my Patreon content and kind of sorting out my work-life balance because it's a bit of a mess at the moment, and I'm gonna burn out if I'm not careful. So I really do need some help. If you would like to join the Patreon, you're welcome to. The lowest tier is $4 a month. You can join my Discord server if you sign up. It's basically like a chat room for autistic people, neurodivergent people. You don't have to be diagnosed, to join. But yeah, you can just chat, make friends. There's lots of different channels of different topics, lots of different autistic special interests represented there. It's just a really, really lovely space. And then I also have exclusive content over there. I have exclusive videos. I have podcast episodes. If you want to stay on YouTube, I'll leave my video I made last week linked on screen. I was reacting to the subreddit r/bad women's anatomy. It was an interesting journey. Apparently 80% of men are autistic, according to the internet. And if you would like to check out X Styles, the link is in the description. The QR code is on screen. As I say, you can give it a try for free. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video very, very soon. I don't know how many more we'll have with this backdrop, but not very many.